Mehdi Hasan is a long-time journalist slash commentator on many various interesting issues, and especially in the basically since October 7, he also, of course, has been commenting on the Israeli conflict a lot, and he has had many interesting opinions. Let's just keep it at that. So we'll go through some of them. We have one video which I think really summarizes the way he conducts his sort of journalism really well. So we'll go through that. But before that, let me just and joining me today, and also welcome to the reality show. Joining me today is Marco, Richard, and Michael. And let me just go quickly around the panel about what they know, if they heard about Mehdi Hasan before. Let me start with Michael. Have you followed Mehdi Hasan before, or where did he sort of jump into your?
No, I haven't. I haven't followed him. I don't. I certainly won't follow him after today's discussion.
Marco?
Yeah, same as Michael, really. To be honest, I take issue at calling him a journalist because a journalist reports the facts. He's an opinionist and a very much biased opinionist, somebody who has an agenda and doesn't miss a trick in order to expose his views, which are pretty repellent.
Yeah, if Twitter is a TV channel, or can be, then that's the kind of mode he's in. He's the yelling an opinion out into the ether with no chance of a comeback because he's yelling so loudly and then is done. So yeah, I haven't encountered him much, not least because MSNBC is not my channel of choice. But of course, I've heard Razi mention him a number of times in the course of his list of rogues, when mentioning like Owen Jones or any of the others. All their different categories, whether it's your Tucker Carlsons or Candace Owens or Mehdi Hasan. They're all the same set of are they journalists? No, quite honestly. But do they get a lot of attention? Yes, and that's obviously why we're covering them.
So just quickly, you mentioned he worked at MSNBC. Before he worked for Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari state-run media. He worked for MSNBC, where he had his own show. That show was canceled in November 23, so just 1 month after October 7th. I haven't really found out what was really the official reason, although the speculation is that he was, in a sense, being too pro-Hamas, even for media such as MSNBC. He afterwards has left MSNBC altogether in January, and after that he has founded his own sort of media company. Something that was also interesting, and someone in the chat is saying Wikipedia calls Mehdi a progressive. I'm not necessarily sure what do you mean to imply by that. I mean, I think he could be in like that. He's definitely in that sort of like a broad window of like American progressives. Again,
Yeah, he would fit right in with the Democratic Progressive Party. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're all pro-Hamas.
And something that I've seen that in I think interview, I think it was in March, he has complained that Palestinian perspectives are not being shared in media, which I think could have two explanations. Either he doesn't really watch any media at all. I think that in a sense there is. I mean, the fact that someone like, for example, Norman Finkelstein gets interviews, I think is more than enough to sort of represent the pro-Palestinian perspective. But if he really, and if he, let's say, if he considers him getting his show canceled, or his sort of opinions not being shared as not the pro-Palestinian side, then I'm really worried about what he really considers pro-Palestinian side, because the views he expressed are like so, like I would consider them so anti-Semitic and so anti-Israeli and pro-Hamas that if that perspective is not being shared that much, I would consider that a positive thing, and I don't think it's it's something we should be worried about. But anything you guys like to say before we go to the video?
I've just got to, comment on the word progressive, because like journalism, it's just it's like a punch in the gut, isn't it? Every time you hear the word progress, debased in such a manner, but and used it in relation to the CRT crowd and all of their associated arguments. So, but I think that word is probably lost to the rest of us now, and has become a term of abuse. But yeah, I pine for its past.
To be honest, if you look at the website of his new enterprise, he's got people like Greta Thunberg, Owen Jones, the kind of caliber, proper Marxists in action. And to be honest, all they want to progress to is probably fourth and fifth and sixth intifada, which is part of the movement, actually, the media are following right now. So, and we're seeing a clear shift even in the techniques that Hamas are using in Israel itself. The other day, there was a guy whose backpack blew up. It was supposed to detonate a bomb in some location. I think it was in Tel Aviv, wasn't it?
Yes, in Tel Aviv, correct.
Yeah. But luckily, it blew up on his back and didn't kill anyone. He injured a poor passerby, but it could have been much worse. And this seems to be the new front that Hamas is opening. They can't win an open war, so they, the rats that they are, they're trying to infiltrate Israel and cause as much terror and fear and destroy the morale of the Israelis, really. But and they're supported by the media. The media are playing a massive role into this, and we know who the media are, who's behind them, and what they do.
Yeah, I'm just when I saw this kind of stuff, and I see it when I see it, I remember, there's plenty of people, especially in America, who believe that murderers on death row have lots of rights, and we need to focus on them, and their conditions in prison are they would say deplorable, as they wait for their death to be given to them because they committed egregious acts and have been through millions of dollars worth of appeal processes. You can choose to spend your time listening to people who want to defend murderers and worry about their living conditions, or you can spend your time on the people where we didn't give them millions of dollars in support for communities because we were wasting it on the nth appeal for these folks and on housing them at somewhere north of $60,000 per year while they wait for their execution. You can spend your time focused on those people. That's not a world that's going to look any better than the current world. In fact, it'll look a lot worse. And this is again what you're seeing is somebody who says there's some Palestinians who have a grievance. Israel's missile was almost perfect, but it did kill a few civilians who just happened to be standing within 3 meters of a whole group of terrorists. And you can focus on that, or you can say, what the heck are the terrorists doing standing next to the civilians? And of course, Israel should attack. So we can get into that as we talk about things, but a lot of this just depends on, do they have anything to say? Yeah, maybe. Is it important in the grand scheme of priorities? Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit important.
Yeah, just quickly, because Michael in the chat mentions that was progressive ever used positively? And yeah, when people talk about progressive, I view it similarly when people talk about conservative. It doesn't really have any meaning. It doesn't really stand for anything. It's just this sort of blanket. Conservative is just, let's just keep it the way it is. And progressive is just, let's just change it. And again, there's no real standard. There's no real no real foundational belief behind it. Because, when you think about the original progressives from like the late 19th century, it's people like Teddy Roosevelt and people like, the original progressive established the income tax in America. The original progressive established the antitrust rules. So yeah, I don't think progressivism has ever been used, has ever really stood for anything good.
I think think that's true. I think that it's the etymology of it having the word progress in it, and the sense that it's sort of inevitable, and as long as people eventually come along with us, we'll all be heading in the same direction, and that'll be a better future than today. And all of that is, you know, a bastardization of reality.
Yeah, the whole thing, as usual, has got a Marxist undertone. You know, the way history has to evolve, has to move towards a certain direction, and that's a kind of thing that they're trying to sneak in every time you talk about progression. It's like you moving towards utopia with us. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and not to mention progressivism is implied to the government side, which I don't think there's ever reason for a government to, in a sense, progress. We pretty much, unless we come out with a new theory that is even better at protecting individual rights, I don't think there's ever need for a government to, in a sense, evolve in any way. So the way they use it is, again, sort of like anti-individual rights. But let's actually go to the video now, and we'll be pausing a lot because he gets through a lot of things very quickly. But oh wait, let me make sure we share the sound.
As Israel prepares to invade Rafah, violate Joe Biden's red line, and kill who knows how many more thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. We need to talk about the hostages. Because the Israelis say this is all about the hostages. They say we don't talk about the hostages enough. So let's do that. Let's talk today about the hostages, because there are three very important things they don't tell you about the hostages. First, for everyone who believes that Benjamin Netanyahu and his government of far-right fascists and racists are fighting their war in Gaza in order to rescue the hostages, how do they explain the fact that Netanyahu had a chance to bring all of the civilian hostages home right at the very beginning? Those aren't my words. That's not my opinion. It's the view of Chaim Rubinstein, who until very recently was a spokesman for the families of the Israeli hostages, and who said last week, quote, "We learned that Hamas offered on October 9th or 10th to release all the captive civilians in its hands if the IDF did not enter the Gaza Strip, but the government rejected the offer."
All right, so already, just quickly, I just quickly want to comment on that last statement, and then I'll give it to you guys. So the quote is, "We learned that Hamas offered on October 9th or 10th to release all the captive civilians in its hands if the IDF did not enter the Gaza Strip, but the government rejected the offer." So October 9th or 10th, 2 days after Hamas has crossed the border, went into Israel, killed, raped, mutilated more than 1,000 of Israeli civilians, has kidnapped more than 200 Israeli civilians. And after they have done all that, they offered, "We'll give it back if you don't invade us." Like, in what world is that, as Richard had said earlier, in what sense is this like journalism? You are like, this is not even lying. You are so like disrupting whatever the reality that is. Like the fact that Hamas could like do that, could take hostages and do a terrorist attack and basically get away with it, just like that. And he, you know, the way he puts it is just, yeah, it should be done like that. It's crazy, but I want to hear about what you guys think. So, Michael, let me start with you first.
Sure. There's a saying, a fool and his money are easily parted. Well, in this case, a fool and his life are more easily parted. If you listen to that statement and think about what he said, you realize how absolutely absurd it is. There's really no comment about it, but these people are clearly just preying on stupid people. I mean, there's no other way. I don't know what you can do to that. It's like when I have patients that have a malignant tumor growing and they've been sick for 6 months and they finally show up at the doctor and they've lost 20 pounds. And I'm saying, why are you here now? Well, my wife made me or something. And the answer is, how do you help that person? You can't. The cancer spread throughout their body. The best you can do is keep them comfortable. This kind of statement how do you even begin to respond to that? Of course, you have to do it rationally and say, well, they just killed 1,200 people of ours. They've invaded. And by the way, at that point, there were still Hamas terrorists roaming around Israel, actually trying to get up to Tel Aviv. Oh, by the way. All right. And we were all pretty scared. And we had our doors double locked, and we had all kinds of police presence in all of our communities in Tel Aviv during this period. You have to just say to them, this was an act of war, and they got exactly what they asked for. They got a war. The other thing, and just to forecast it, because he then goes on and talks about all the times that Hamas graciously, the terrorist organization graciously, offered to return the hostages as if they were good people, always to stop the war, number one, and also to get back a whole bunch of terrorists out of Israeli jails, to get them back into Gaza so that they could rejuvenate them and get them to be terrorists again. By the way, I believe it's Sinwar or his kids were actually treated in Israeli hospitals and returned to Gaza and have lived to kill more Jews. So let's just all be clear. You listen to these folks, and if you want to believe that crap, great. But when it happens to you, you should only have one person to look for, and that's yourself in the mirror, and wonder why this happened to you, because it's very clear.
Yeah, it was Sinwar who, again, was in Israeli. I think he was serving like many consecutive life sentences for killing Israeli citizens. And yeah, I think it was a brain tumor or something like that. That first, so they healed him, and then they released him. And again, yeah, Sinwar, until now, he was just someone who orchestrated October 7. Now he's someone who is leading Hamas. So Israel had people who were high figures and even leading Hamas in their jail, and they released him. And now the argument is we should again release. And he'll be talking about, he won't be talking about Israeli prisoners. He will be talking about Israeli hostages, meaning Palestinians being in Israeli jails, but he refers to them as hostages. We'll talk about that a bit later, but let me go to Marco now.
Yeah, I mean, as you listen to this guy talking, you realize what kind of anti-conceptual person he is. Everything to him is a concrete taken out of context. He refers to facts, but they are so stripped out and taken out, wherever they've been generated, that they don't even make any sense. His whole point is to always make equivalence between Israel and Hamas. In the end, he always does that. So you're talking about hostages, as you just mentioned. There are some hostages who were people celebrating a day off in a festival, celebrating music with their friends and whatever. And on the other side, there's a bunch of people who have been trying to kill, try and blow up or hit with cars, again, innocent Israelis who happen to be in front of them. And those particular ones are taken into jail because they are murderers or attempted murderers or terrorists of some kind. And you make equivalence between the two groups. So one group has been taken away from wherever they were doing with their friends. The other one is actually a bunch of criminals. And he's trying to push the equivalence again. And then you have this kind of use of narrative, which is very similar. If you look at his style and the style of Owen Jones, they're very similar. They've got this kind of flippant teenager attitude. I'm not listening. I'm just telling you how things are, and if you don't understand what I'm on about, you're just stupid. And it's quite interesting because this guy has actually written a book about how to win on debates like this. So he's an Oxford graduate, so he's hardly the bottom of the pile. But of course, we know what happens in university, especially here in Britain. You get radicalized towards this kind of thinking, i.e., not thinking. And then he does all sorts of. It tends to rely very much on what somebody else said, every 2 words, every time he says something, oh wait, I didn't say this guy said it. And again, taking totally out of context. First of all, you never know most of the time who the guy is referring to is, and then he takes only stuff that is meaningful or at least sounds impressive. Like in the segment, he talks about, Netanyahu crossed Biden's red lines. Like, so what? Who the heck is Biden in this relationship? You know, but we're supposed to believe that what he says and the way he supports his statement is done in a way that, you know, is important because somebody else says something and he mentioned it. It's like, really, it is continued, you know, fallacy of relying on authority, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, because you mentioned his sort of out of context quote usage. So in preparation for this, I've also watched not really sure if it was a debate, more of an interview with Benny Morris that Mehdi Hasan did. I think it was published about 3 weeks ago. It's about an hour, and pretty much Mehdi Hasan, the only thing he did was bringing up different quotes from either directly from Benny Morris or about Benny Morris, and Benny Morris had to correct him on every single one because every single quote he used was completely out of context. And yeah, this sort of like almost fetishization of just like finding one quote and like, this is what you said and this is what they said, again, completely dropping the context, not really even trying to understand situation. You know, when you do this sort of like like dropping quotes, again, you are just trying to basically sort of do like a gotcha, like this is what you said, instead of like actually, you know, having that person like explain themselves. You know, that's why we always play the whole videos, or at least large parts of the videos. And in this episode, we'll probably go through his whole video, so nothing is out of context. This is what he wanted you to see, and what he wants you to see is pretty disgusting so far. But let me go to Richard before we move on with the video.
Yeah, sure. And I want to apologize to our audience for the fact we're even showing this guy, to be honest, because the less you see of him, the better. And we tried to keep the first clip as far into the episode as we could. But we will be returning to him in a minute because he damns himself with his own words. And that's the best way for showing who he is. I mean, the comparison between how he behaves in this particular clip that we're showing, which is a monologue, a pre-prepared monologue to camera, compared with the debate itself, they're very similar with some slight differences, because the monologue is still there in the debate because he's trying to crush anyone he ever talks to with his own monologue, his own pre-prepared opinion and quotes, etc. So there's a lot of overlap there. But of course, he's also simply trying to ha-ha the other person every time, to trip them up like a teenager sticking their foot out and trying to trip somebody up walking down the corridor. That's the technique he's trying to use. But to return to this clip and what we just saw, let's look at just the tone of his voice when he's talking about the hostages with such contempt in his voice. And if you actually consider the hostages that he's referring to at that point in the clip and who they are, and the fact they're children and old people and completely innocent people been ripped out of their lives, treated horrendously even before they've been dragged across the border into Gaza, and the contempt and smug attitude towards it is just skin crawling. Even and then of course he's offering the fact that Hamas offered a tiny little window immediately after the event in which you could have got them back, in which you could have shown Israel could have shown itself to be weak and capitulated instantly to the aggressors who'd stolen their citizens, but also not only weak, it would have given up the right to self-defense immediately. It would have gone, right, okay, because you took our citizens, we're not going to defend ourselves, we just want them back. And the idea that could have been done and is just horrendous if you think about it. It just means that we can come in, we can kill however many Jews we want, and then we'll return people the next day if you ask for it nicely and don't come into our territory, and then we'll do it again, and we can repeat it until we've wiped out your entire Israeli population. it's just hideous. And then the stuff you guys have covered. It's not my words. It's not my opinion. Of course, it is his words and his opinion. It's his selective choice of which quote to include, at which juncture, which message, which narrative to peddle. So you can't pretend you're a neutral bystander when that is your aim. Clearly, it's big agenda all the way.
All right, let's continue with the video.
In fact, the Washington Post reported on a similar proposal at the end of October, saying Hamas was proposing to release all foreign civilian hostages in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire. Israeli civilian hostages would be released if additional demands were met, he said, including the release of Palestinian women and children in Israeli prisons and the opening of the Rafah border crossing. Second, for everyone who pops up on my Twitter feed to still tell me, well, Hamas could end this war if they just released all the hostages, have they paid any attention to anything the Israeli government has actually said on this subject? Israeli officials have said time and again that the war won't end until Hamas is destroyed, regardless of whether the hostages are released. Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, made clear this week he was opposed to any hostage release deal that stopped Israel from going into Rafah. Now, you might say, that's just Smotrich, he's not in charge. Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also said this week that he would invade Rafah with or without a deal on the hostages. His words, not mine.
Okay, I think this part is a bit milder compared to the rest of the video. One thing I should have mentioned, this video is about, I think, 4 months old. Just something I should have mentioned at the start. So, you know, when it comes to that video, it was before the Rafah invasion. So that was sort of the main point of the discussion. But just quickly to run through his points. So he mentioned one more deal. Hamas was proposing to release all foreign civilian hostages in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire, which was also basically rejected. He, of course, completely drops the fact that Israel did accept the ceasefire later on, that was 4 days, and Hamas immediately broke it, by the way, yet hostages were still released, or rather, Israeli hostages from Gaza were released for Palestinian terrorists that were caught on October 7. And I just want to quickly cover this point because I'm wondering what you guys think. He focused on how many people say Hamas could end the war right now if they release the hostages. And as much as I don't really like Mehdi Hasan, I think he, in a sense, has a point here. Like, I don't think Israel should end the war even if Hamas has released all the hostages. Hamas has clearly shown that the only reason for its existence is the destruction of Israel. And if the hostages are one way they can do it easier, they will do it. So in a sense, in that way, I would agree with him that, yeah, hostages, and I mean, even Netanyahu has said it, that hostages were, well, I think he still goes in too much into that. But basically, yeah, hostages cannot, in a sense, be the main goal. Again, because people like Mehdi Hasan will use it against you. They will say, well, if you just want the hostages back, agree with the fact that Hamas can attack you any other day, and agree with the ceasefire, and agree that basically you don't have a right to basically destroy the enemy that is whose whole existence is basically your own destruction. But I'm wondering what you guys think. Let me start with Michael.
Well, it's the same thing as why it took 2 atom bombs to get Japan to surrender. Obviously, one wasn't enough. So clearly where we are in this war is not enough. And let's be clear, the hostages returning is one part of an and situation. They have to return the hostages and surrender. That's what Netanyahu has said. As much as I don't like him and I don't agree with much of what he's done, and I certainly hold him responsible for all of it, the one thing I do agree with is that there's two requirements to end the war, and they're very simple. Personally, I don't believe we should be trading Palestinian terrorists who are in our jails, even if they're women and children. We should not be giving them back.
Let me just quickly jump on that point, because people oftentimes say children. The way children are defined is anyone under the age of 18.
Right.
So I think even when people use children, the implication is like Israel is holding 6-year-olds in like Israeli jails, while we know that Hamas is using even people under 18, so like 16, 17-year-olds or younger to basically fight
Even
for them.
younger. No, there's plenty of documentation. There's pictures all over of 12-year-olds and probably even younger of Palestinian Hamas early inductionees. I mean, these are the Hitler youth. And they're given machine guns and they're told to hate Jews and they're practiced shooting pictures of Jews. And that's what their job is to do. And I don't, if a 6-year-old is holding a gun on me, I'm going to pull out my gun and kill them. Period. I'm going to. I'm not going to wait around to see whether I can rehabilitate that person in the hopes that they'll delay their shot and kill me first. It's an absurd position. And only possible by the quote progressives in the world, that the poor oppressed people, and this is their narrative, are somehow allowed multiple opportunities to kill you before you finally might have to say it's time to lock you up. So I agree with you. I'm not saying children because they are a certain age. I'm saying if someone's under the age of 18 and they're holding a gun on me, they go to jail or I shoot them. End of story. I mean, this thing couldn't really be, in a lot of ways, it couldn't be that much simpler. But the important point is that we have to have two conditions for the war to end. And one is Hamas is completely surrenders. And the second one is that our hostages are returned. And if they don't want to do that, just like Japan didn't want to surrender when one of their cities was obliterated, then you have to obliterate a second city. And frankly, if we had to obliterate a third city, we would have. And I fully support that. The world would be a far, far better place and a safer place if good people stood up to evil and put a stop to it. But the notion that we can rehabilitate evil people is so misguided, and it's proven in history to be completely fallacious. It just drives me crazy that we have to continue to repeat history. But I guess humans like to.
Yeah, and just a quick point, when it comes to sort of Hamas propaganda, you have to remember they have two parts. The first part is what Hamas does when they hide in the civilian buildings. When they report their numbers, it's never they don't make a distinction between civilians and basically militants. They don't again, when they say children, it's anyone under 18. Someone in the chat says they consider it even anyone under 19, but I'm not sure if that's true. But again, they will do this, but it takes people like Mehdi Hasan to basically report this again with no actual critical thinking. Basically, yeah, Israel has killed, now the number is over 40,000 people. Again, no context about the way Hamas conducts its war, no context of what the numbers mean, no context of where the numbers are from, even if they are credible. They just report them and help Hamas in this propaganda machine. But let me go to Marco.
Yeah, and let's not mention that the numbers don't matter. It doesn't matter. The whole point is that these people could stop it tomorrow. If they had enough of death and destruction, they could just give up the hostages that are keeping right now. They could just surrender to the IDF, and they just could choose to live a proper life rather than preparing for the death and meeting Allah or whoever they're going to meet. So. But there is a deeper problem, isn't there? That the Israeli government is failing in protecting its own people. Is failing in its main task, which is protecting the Israeli people in Israel. And this kind of pretending that you could get the hostages and stretching it so long that you even imply you're gonna get into negotiation with the people who caused all this in the first place. Frankly, it's just a lying to your own people. The Israeli government is pretending that they can get the hostages and destroy Hamas. They probably know very well that unfortunately most of the hostages are probably dead or not in very good shape. And to go down the route and pulling punches all the time and risking the life of more and more soldiers just for the realization of a goal which cannot be achieved. I mean, Razi already on the second day or on the day itself mentioned the animal directive. And unfortunately, it doesn't sound very nice, but if you want to protect your own people, you have to establish the fact that when somebody's kidnapped, as harsh as it sounds, and I realize that, the family of the people who are held hostages are not going to like it at all. But in the end, if you go down this route, assuming that you can get the hostages back via some deal or something like that, it just means that these guys will do more and more hostage taking, because if they are paying, if the actions they take are paying back, if in the end they manage to get more and more terrorists out of the prisons in Israel, of course they're incentivized to do more hostage taking. And if you really want to protect your own people, you have to get on top of Hamas as fast as you can, as violently as you can, and making sure things like this never happen ever again. And even somebody like Hamas or even the Palestinian Authority would have to think twice next time in order to do something like that. But of course, doing this, you incentivize them. You're telling them, do what you like. We will come to a compromise. And it takes so long now. It's nearly a year now. And the kind of emotionalism attached to the families, and the fact that there are families protesting and asking for a deal and things like that, is just playing into the propaganda arm of Hamas. Hamas is exploring this kind of stuff. Just look what's happening in the Democratic Convention, when you have the family of the hostages talking to the public. How totally irrational this segment was just pure emotional show, trying to associate the deal, reaching an agreement with the suffering that this family is going through because their loved ones are held hostages. And if you keep promoting this emotionalism, and if you keep trying to override reason with emotion and making people react to the emotion itself, you're going to find yourself in the situation that we're in over and over again. This is not a solution. This is just a perpetration of this kind of destruction and death, really.
Mehdi Hasan mocks the position that if you return the hostages, this could all end. Now, as we said, that's only half the story. But he mocks it because he doesn't then include, or he waits a couple of sentences and splits it from mocking it to mention the fact that, there's some small print. You need to release a bunch of Sinwars from jail in order to get that agreement. So you're not just talking about release the hostages and it's all over. And of course, secondly, what about the hostage takers being brought to justice? Because you're abandoning that the second that you don't pursue the hostage takers, you don't pursue the fact that they took hostages in the first place. You would just let them free to do it again. It's just dishonest. It's dishonest and from start to finish, and that's what makes it so evil, frankly, because it's intentional.
Well, it's dangerous. I mean, I agree with you completely. I think what's really scary is that this notion that you're allowed to let this occur to your people. We've said many times on this show, and anybody with any sort of knowledge understands that the primary job of government is to protect its people. And when a group of people from outside say that they want to annihilate you, your job should be to make sure that never happens. If they fail, the Israeli government failed miserably on October 7th. Frankly, I think they failed leading up to it with the constant missile attacks that were occurring from Hamas as it was, and how surprised could they be? It shouldn't have been a shock, but that's the big problem, is that this sort of belief system just enables people like Iran and China, Russia, North Korea, and I don't have to go into Iran's proxies here, but the big four bad players on the Earth stage that really they're just not helping with the average person's productivity and flourishing in the world. And you've got a bunch of so-called progressives that effectively are playing right into their hands. We call them useful idiots, but that's what's dangerous. It is dangerous. It will end up killing us in the freedom-loving countries if we don't put a stop to it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole fact that Hamas has been allowed to exist for such a long time, because as soon as it was established, it started shooting rockets into Israel. And the only reason, and indiscriminately, not like targeting, like the first rockets the Hamas has developed couldn't, the way rockets work, they couldn't even aim them. So, and they were happy with it. As many Jews die, the better. So it doesn't matter for them if it's civilians, if it's military targets. Whoever dies there, it's a good thing. And the only reason why there hasn't been that, the reason why October 7th was specifically horrific thing is because there was no big situation like that before. But it was only because Israel has capabilities to defend itself. But again, that shouldn't be excuse. If someone shoots at you and you are able to dodge it or hide behind something and not get hit, it doesn't mean that they didn't do anything. They still did something that their intention was to kill you, or their intention was to destroy you. Hamas's intention is to completely destroy Israel and kill everyone, every single Jew in the area, or at least completely get them out of the area. And the fact that people are defending that is just terrible. But let's hear more from Hamas's top propagandist.
And third, something that keeps being left out of the mainstream media, ignored by all those who claim to care about hostages, is that the hostages at the core of this conflict, at the heart of this current round of killing and violence, aren't just Israelis, they're Palestinians too. Yes, Palestinians too, because while we're all aware of the fact that around 250 hostages were taken from Israel by Hamas and other armed groups on October the 7th, including, shamefully, children, and around 130 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza, we don't really mention the hundreds, thousands of Palestinians who've been rounded up, detained, held without trial, tortured, sexually abused, without any charges, let alone any convictions, in Israeli prisons. And I'm not...
All right, yeah, that part is simply ridiculous. I mean, when he says the fact, people, the Palestinians in Israeli jails are terrorists, are people who have committed either terrorist acts against Israel or have broken laws. You don't call a people in American prisons are not hostages of the American government. They have broken laws and are being punished because of it. And even, I mean, have you seen that? He talked about the people, the Palestinians in Israeli jail, and he showed 2 pictures of children of like 6 and 7-year-olds. Like that's all that Israel has. It's just these 6-year-olds, in Israeli jails. That's all it has. I mean, the whole way he shows it, it's clear what he's trying to show, and it's clear what his, agenda is. And it's simply ridiculous. Also, the fact that he says Palestinians in Israeli jails are being sexually assaulted. Again, we have, the recent case we talked about, that didn't happen. We know that injury was self-inflicted by the Palestinian itself. And again, when that happens, when something that shouldn't be done is done by the Israeli soldiers, they are being punished for it. Again, Israel doesn't have a policy of just, sexually assaulting Palestinians. That is a policy of Hamas, but not of Israel or the IDF. But let me start with Michael again. What do you think about this?
Well, it's, if there's 1,000 people that Hamas has brutalized and one person that Israel has brutalized, obviously Israel's at fault. And it's the same thing in the world. It's the same crap that we hear about American flag burning. America is not perfect. Therefore, it deserves the same treatment, actually less, because we should be perfect and we should aspire to perfection. In fact, we should deliver it. And if we don't, then we, being the oppressors, are guilty. It's an absurd notion. It really, again, it goes back to how foolish and ignorant can people be, and obviously quite foolish and quite ignorant. Actually, the Israeli army and Israel society is under a judicial system that is equal to the Western judicial system. It's the same. It's one of the reasons why the International Court of Justice, another one of these ridiculous names, doesn't really have purview there, because the IJC is supposed to have purview over places that don't have an investigative judicial branch. And we've seen that. The other thing is it absolutely, sure, there were some kids that were taken by the terrorists, by the Hamas terrorists. Sure, there were women taken. Well, we have some of the women that have returned, and we found out that they were sexually abused, which is just a nice word for rape. They were raped repeatedly for the months that they were in captivity. These are not undocumented cases, and these are not isolated incidents. This was a systematic, and there were pamphlets actually that have been obtained from Hamas that describe how to systematically sexually and otherwise abuse people. But again, we have moral equivalency. This was, in the West, this was started by Barack Obama, this moral equivalency, where if you're not perfect, you're just as guilty as everybody else. And it's clearly doesn't exist in the real world, this idea. We do weed out the bad actors in Israel, and we shouldn't even be talking about that. The last point I'll make is that Israel has the lowest ratio of non-combatants to combatants that there is in modern warfare, and even since World War II, clearly, by any standards. The US, when it destroyed ISIS, had a much higher ratio of civilians, and those were really civilians. They weren't people that voted for ISIS to take over. They were civilians in many cases. We had a much worse number. Nobody got up there in their pulpit, not anybody that was notable, and talked about it. But suddenly Israel comes under a ridiculous thing, and no matter how many times experts in the US and everybody else say that Israel does have the lowest ratio here, it's people like this continue to perpetuate the idea that this is indiscriminate killing.
Marco?
Yeah, this is a point where it actually reveals itself as being a real evil piece of work, because using the word Israel rounded up the Palestinians, he uses the word rounded up just like the Nazis were rounding up the Jews during the Holocaust. I mean, this guy, as I said earlier on, is educated at Oxford. He's a Brit who's a Muslim. He's a Muslim Shia. The only controversial if you like, Muslim views he ever expressed was against Saudi Arabia, because of course Saudi Arabia is Sunni. So you would never find a Shia, celebrating Saudi Arabia. He never criticized Iran, of course, and he also expressed in the past quite some really strong anti-civilized world views based on his faith, and he even went to Oxford trying to argue that Islam is a religion of peace. His main argument was 1.4 billion people are Muslim, and not everybody blows themselves up, therefore Islam is a religion of peace. That was roughly his argument. So, but here he actually betrays that his agenda is a total anti-Semitic, anti-Israel agenda behind this one, because he uses the kind of terms, as I said, the flippant, petulant way his body language is making him coming across, betrays the fact that he has total contempt for the Israeli government, the Israeli state. In fact, he clearly doesn't want the Israeli state to exist, and the fact that he excuses and makes this moral equivalence all the time is betraying the fact that he sees Hamas as the good guys, and that is absolutely inexcusable. Somebody in his position who has access to information, he probably speaks Arabic. I don't know, I don't care, but he probably sees information more directly than we do. He would know where the right and wrong lays, and he chooses to stand on the side of evil. again, does he look like a happy guy to you? I mean, he's clearly miserable scene. Now, of course, he's miserable scene because he chooses to go down the exaltation of irrational thought, exaltation of death. And what do you expect him to do? He comes up with this kind of crap.
I think if you return to the beginning of what he said in this monologue, when he introduced the subject of the hostages, as if he wanted to be fair-minded and give enough attention to the hostages. Now, it sounded disingenuous at the start because you could already pick up from the tone where this was going to head. But by this point of the monologue, what he's saying is, yeah, there are Israeli hostages, and he mentions them long enough to rip down their posters and then talk about the Palestinians behind those posters who he's really sympathetic towards. And those are the ones who have committed various acts and have ended up in jail as a result. Some of those cases are still going through. Some of those cases take longer than they should, perhaps, but nevertheless, the actions of those individuals are what have led to them being in jail. The actions of hostages they're entirely innocent. They're literally in their beds at the point when they've been ripped from their homes and their lives. So to equate the two is to lie flagrantly. And then you guys covered the other points sufficiently.
Let me just quickly thank the super chatters. We have a super chat from Jeff. Thank you so much. A super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And a super chat from Garbled Words, who says, I recommend him getting taken on by Douglas Murray, etc. on the Monk debates recently. Yeah, I think I've seen a short clip from that. And I think one part I've seen is specifically when, Mehdi Hasan was quoting something and the other panelists showed him he was completely, again, misquoting and trying to basically claim someone has said something they haven't. But we have about 2 minutes left of the video, so I recommend we just shoot through it and try to cover the points he says.
I'm not even talking about just since October the 7th. I'm talking about before October the 7th. According to the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, on the eve of the October 7th attacks, at the end of September 2023, Israel was holding over 1,300 Palestinians as hostages in what they conveniently call administrative detention. Around half of them for a year or more, and 23 of them, shamefully, children, held without trial, without charge. The reality is that under international law, hostage-taking is a war crime whether Palestinians or Israelis do it, just as intentionally targeting and killing civilians is a war crime whether Palestinians or Israelis do it. So, to summarize then, the Netanyahu government chose not to do a deal to release the Israeli hostages, according to the spokesman for their family members. Even if Hamas were to release the hostages tomorrow morning, Israel has no plans to end its assault on Gaza. And, the biggest issue of all perhaps, the hostages aren't just on the Israeli side, they're on the Palestinian side too. Those are the facts. The objective, demonstrable, undeniable facts. And look, this is a human tragedy. Many innocent Israelis are wrongly being held hostage in Gaza, and many Israeli families are waiting for a father, a brother, a loved one to come home. And to them I say I stand in solidarity, in humanity, with you. I say free the hostages, Israeli and Palestinian. But, and there is a but, as the Israeli military prepares to wipe out Rafah and kill thousands more people. Remember this, when the bad faith apologists for Israel pop up on TV or online to justify that violence, and to robotically and cynically repeat, what about the hostages? Ignoring all of the three things that I just pointed out to you, treat that dishonest refrain with the contempt it deserves.
Yeah, talking about, pot calling the kettle black, or however that phrase works, talking about like dishonesty, like this whole thing was completely dishonest. And yeah, I mean, he pretty much was just summarizing what he said. So maybe we can again just summarize everything he has said. I mean, this whole situation is laughable. Basically, what you're supposed to walk away with is that basically Israel is terrible. I mean, that pretty much was the focus of the video. Or what usually you see these people do is not necessarily that Israel is terrible, but Israel is as bad as Hamas. Basically, trying to equate them and basically say, okay, because it's really hard to deny what Hamas is doing. It's hard to deny the rapes on October 7th, yet many people do it easily. It's hard to deny the atrocities that Hamas is doing. It's hard to deny the fact that Hamas is a tyrannical government, and that is their goal. If you read their charter, the stated goal is to establish an Islamic theocracy and get rid of all the Jews also. But that is their goal. They cannot deny it. But what they can try to do is say, but Israel is bad too. So this sort of like moral equivocation is what we oftentimes see, especially with these people, but also with many, let's say, anti-Americans just trying to say, I just remember that quote from, I'm going to talk about Trump so people can mention TDS in the chat. But at some point, someone was, reporter was talking about how Putin was like killing his political opponents, and Trump's response was, well, we kill people too. Yeah, this sort of like trying to equate, again, completely dropping the context and trying to take the good or sort of the better, the best we have, and compare it to the worst we have is the destruction of the good. But let me just go around the panel one last time. Michael?
Yeah, one bit of advice I'd give to folks, and it took me a while to get this. You don't have to listen to these so-called experts who sound good. There's some basic, simple principles, like read the Hamas charter, read the Israeli charter, see which one is more about like the world you would want to live in. One says we need to destroy all the Jews, and there will only be one kind of solution called the one-state solution, and the one-state solution is a Sharia law solution with no Israel and river to the sea. And the other one talks about building a government and a group to protect people and let them flourish. And all you need to do is visit Israel to see what kind of country it is, and go visit all the other Middle Eastern states, not just the Palestinian Authority or Gaza if you want to say they've been oppressed. Go look at the free states like Egypt and Jordan. Go look at Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. And don't equate Bahrain's wealth, which is from oil, or the UAE with what Israel has accomplished. So my best advice is you don't have to listen to these folks. You just have to think about what they're actually saying. Go to basic principles. And the last thing I'll say is that the U.S. Has many administrative detainees. We have black sites. We have all kinds of stuff going on. This whole thing was so, I mean, really, you have to think that state actors, listen to this guy, you think that most states are just good people. Most countries just don't have these kinds of detention programs. There's a big difference, as Daniel said, and it's really important to remember. You had to do something to actually get, quote, rounded up by the Israelis and put in jail. And by the way, if you're in a war and you're a terrorist, you don't actually have rights. The Constitution of Israel does not apply to people that have committed terrorist acts against Israel. Just like in America, the Constitution of America does not apply to even enemy combatants. Even an American citizen is declared an enemy combatant. So the whole thing really relies on people's ignorance and stupidity and not thinking about what they're saying.
Marco?
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. And this kind of people, they talk. What did it last? This video about 7, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. It really said nothing apart from there are no hostages, because there are hostages on the Israeli side and hostages on the Gaza side. So, there's not really hostages. It's all the same. And of course, totally ignoring the fact that in a war, there is such a thing as prisoners of war. And during peace, there is such a thing as criminality. And in a as you guys mentioned, in a law-abiding, due process-abiding country, free country, criminals are put in jails. and but also this guy is clearly very sharp at trying to make these points and sneak through his agenda. Just look at the end, how he comes across like, I'm pro returning the hostages. This is a humanitarian thing, so I love everybody on both sides, and Israel is the bad guy. He always does that. He always pretending to agree with the point of the other side. Actually, he whacks you in the head and sneaks through this kind of moral equivalency and effectively makes the case for the opposite side, for his side, Hamas side, the death side. And he does that all the time. So beware of this kind of people who pretend to be balanced and not to express an opinion, because by smoothing down the moral equivalence, making bad and good look the same, and pretending that he doesn't take a position, he actually takes a position. If you're stupid enough to go down the route and believe him and allow him to think on your behalf, well, perhaps you deserve everything that comes your way.
Earlier in this episode, I got my knickers in a twist over the use of the word progressive, or the use of the word objective in the mouth of Mehdi Hasan managed to trump that, because that is a complete abuse of the concept when the manner in which he's using it, as of course is the abuse of the concept of the word hostages. What he's saying here is free everyone, murders, rapists, and kidnap victims. And if you say it like that, you suddenly realize what he's saying. He's saying, that he's equating the two. Or you can look at the fact his use of the phrase targeting civilians is a war crime, whoever does it. Targeting civilians. Yes, targeting civilians is what Hamas does on October the 7th by, flying in on paragliders and trying to kill and abduct anyone they come across. That's targeting civilians. Trying to annihilate and cancel out terrorists who are hiding among civilians in Gaza, in the hospitals, schools, etc., is not targeting civilians. The civilians are the collateral damage, and why are they the collateral damage? Because of the manner in which they're used by Hamas. That's the full context needed, and that's what exposes the lies that he's peddling, this guy. And it's pretty obvious as long as you pay attention and don't get suckered in to passively accepting the set of words which he uses to skip over the necessary facts.
And with that, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. We were supposed to do a TDO today, but we had to postpone it, and we will be talking about the history didn't start on October 7th. The quote that is used a lot by basically people trying to excuse what Hamas did on October 7th. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. Thank you guys for joining me today. Where can people find you first, Michael?
Hoffman, 2Fs, LinkedIn.
Marco and Richard?
Briefly Objective, sister channel to this one, and Substack.
And you can find me on YouTube. My channel is called Damn Dan. All of us information will be in the description. Again, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.
Bye.